In the quiet confines of an ordinary school, a boy sat helplessly in his classroom as a barrage of chalkboard erasers was hurled at him. The cruel laughter of his classmates filled the air while he remained still, enduring the assault. When he finally summoned the courage to speak up, asking them to stop, the atmosphere instantly shifted. One of the bullies rose with fury and unleashed a series of violent punches on the boy, hitting him hard again and again. Just when the situation seemed unbearable, another student walked in. His presence interrupted the attack not out of compassion, but because he noticed a teacher approaching. For a brief moment, the bullied boy felt a flicker of hope. He believed that maybe, just maybe, the teacher would intervene and finally stop the torment, but that hope quickly vanished. The teacher saw everything and chose to ignore it. The beating continued as if nothing had happened. Then came a final blow. Someone taped a cruel note on the boy's back. It read, "I have no parents." The teacher, once again, did nothing. The pain from the hits was nothing compared to the sharp sting of humiliation and abandonment. That note stayed on him like a brand, echoing his loneliness, and with the silent acceptance of the adult who should have protected him. His despair grew deeper. Later, during lunch break, a student who seemed to hold a high status in the school arrived on the scene. He casually demanded a cigarette from the very bully who had been attacking the boy earlier. As he stood nearby, his eyes fell upon the cruel note still stuck to the boy's back. He asked who had written it. The bully who placed the note answered, not with shame, but with anger. Without hesitation, the newcomer struck the bully with intense force. That single moment burned itself into the bullied boy's mind. It was the first time someone had stood up and fought back. Watching that boy use his strength to protect, to dominate, to command respect, to planted a seed inside his heart. He realized that being strong could protect him. Being strong could change everything. That was the turning point after school. The boy walked home, but something inside him had shifted. He no longer saw himself as the helpless victim. He made a decision. From that day on, he began training. He started by jogging, pushing his body to the limit, running for hours. He watched martial arts videos, studying every move. He lifted weights, gradually building his strength. Day by day, week by week, month by month, his body began to change. Years passed. The frail and broken boy was gone. In his place stood someone entirely different, taller, stronger, more confident. When he returned, people hardly recognized him. The transformation was so intense that even familiar faces hesitated to speak to him. Whispers followed him through the hallways. Some warned others to stay away. His name now carried weight, and that name was Kwon Dogan. At a certain high school, the ideal of a safe and disciplined environment existed only in theory. In practice, bullying was rampant, frequent, and brutal. Despite being something that should never be tolerated, it happened openly, as if it were part of the daily routine. And within this twisted reality, the bullies were not faceless. They had their own title, Iljin. It wasn't just a label. It was a reputation, a warning, and a hierarchy. Behind the scenes, however, a plan was in motion. Inside a school security office, a quiet yet daring initiative had begun. It was called Iljin, in charge of Iljin. The aim was simple, in principle, but dangerous in execution. Gather powerful individuals to secretly fight against the ILJIN and dismantle their control from within. The idea stirred a fierce debate. It was based on the philosophy of using violence to suppress violence. While some opposed this approach, others saw it as a necessary evil. The project's leader believed it was the only way. In time, the head of the organization gave approval to move forward and authorized a search for individuals strong enough to stand against the Iljin. Elsewhere, at a small convenience store, a young man named Kwon Dagan was working a shift behind the counter. He had once been a student, but without clear cause, he had been expelled. Now, with no school and no direction, he worked quietly in the store, his energy low, his thoughts scattered. The monotony weighed on him, and he longed for something, anything that could release the pressure building inside. He needed a place where he could let go of his stress. At the same time, a group of Iljin was out roaming the streets. They spotted a young student and began harassing him. But before things escalated, Their leader ordered them to stop and focus on something else. He told one of them to go buy cigarettes. The group, still full of restless energy, made their way to a nearby convenience store. They entered the store where Kwon Daegan was working. Two of them picked up bottles of alcohol and approached the counter. Though they looked young, their confidence was high. But Kwon Daegan was not the type to look away from rules. He noticed they were underage and reminded them that they weren't allowed to purchase alcohol. This warning didn't sit well with them. One of the ILJIN members grew aggressive, stepping closer, his voice rising. The situation escalated quickly. The store's manager, noticing the tension, stepped in. Wanting to avoid damage to the store, he instructed them to take the matter outside if they wanted to settle it. Outside, the Iljin still had his hand gripped tightly on the hood of Kwon Daegan's sweatshirt. Kwon Daegan gave him a final warning, counting down seconds to let go. A girl who was with the Iljin laughed, amused at how clueless he seemed about the situation. But her amusement didn't last. In just 3 seconds, the ILJIN was unconscious, knocked out, before he could even process what had happened. When he finally regained his senses, he was disoriented and confused, unable to comprehend how easily he had been beaten. Embarrassed and desperate, he told the girl to call for backup. She did as told. More Iljin members arrived. Among them was a particularly large high schooler named Daeon, whose size and appearance resembled that of a grown man. He stepped forward with confidence, believing brute strength would be enough, but it wasn't. With a single slap, Daeon collapsed to the ground, unconscious. Kwon Daegan realized he had no time to waste. Rather than fight them one by one, he told all of them to come at him together. They attacked at once, but it didn't matter. He overwhelmed them completely, knocking them all down with precise and powerful blows. The first Iljin, now desperate, grabbed a glass bottle and lunged at Kwon Daegan, but Kwon Daegan responded with ruthless efficiency, striking him so hard that the fight ended instantly. Only one opponent remained, their leader. But the moment their leader saw Kwon Daegan clearly, his expression changed. He recognized him. This wasn't just any fighter. This was Kwon Daegan, once the dominant figure in the Incheon area. The leader immediately changed his tone. With a serious expression, he apologized and ordered his group to never return to this place again. From a distance, a woman observed everything. She represented the Golden Dragon Education Group, and she was the head of the secret project targeting the Iljin. She had been searching for someone exactly like him. Now, she had found him. She approached Kwon Daegan and offered him a chance to fight back against the very system that had once abandoned him. A mission to confront the ILJIN in schools, to dismantle their power with his own hands. Kwon Daegan accepted the offer, and at the age of 20, he returned to school as a victim, but as a force that could change everything. The plan was finally set in motion. After observing his strength and attitude firsthand, the organizers of the Iljin, in charge of Iljin Project, approached Kwon Daegan to explain their mission. They laid everything out: the structure, the goals, and the reason they had been watching him. It wasn't just about stopping the ILJIN. It was about replacing fear with order. But when they offered him the position, Kwon Daegan rejected it. He wasn't interested in playing along with other people's ideas. His life had already been pulled off track. And now, even with his strength, he found himself aimless. He was stuck working at a convenience store, living a routine that drained him, doing nothing that truly mattered. The pressure of his own dissatisfaction and the lack of opportunities weighed on him heavily. Eventually, those feelings pushed him toward reconsidering the proposal. He agreed, and soon, Kwon Daegan found himself back inside a school building. It was a place he had once left behind, expelled without clear reason. Now 20 years old, walking these halls again stirred something strange inside him. The rows of desks, the chatter in the corridors, the sound of distant footsteps, it all felt unfamiliar and distant, as if he didn't belong there anymore. But this time, he wasn't a student returning for education. He had a mission, in a different classroom, far from where Kwon Daegan entered. An old cycle repeated itself. Two students, Jongmin and Hojung, had chosen a target for their bullying. Their victim sat quietly, enduring the hits before the teacher arrived. The abuse was methodical and unchallenged. As the teacher stepped in to introduce a new student, the violence paused, but the atmosphere remained the same. When Kwon Daegan entered the room, his height and looks drew immediate attention. The girls whispered to one another, impressed by his appearance. He looked different, older, stronger, more mature. It didn't take long before Hojong laid eyes on him and marked him as a new target. Kwon Daegan took his seat and was paired with a classmate named Kim Min-soo. The boy seemed quiet, timid, and avoided eye contact. As they sat together, Kim Min-soo gave him a brief warning. "Things were different here," he said. This class wasn't like the one Kwon Daegan had once known. He spoke from experience. He was one of the bullied students. Moments later, the truth of his words became clear. Hojong suddenly struck Kim Min-soo on the back of the head with force. The classroom didn't react. It was just another day. Kim Min-soo was then ordered to run out and buy bread, insulted loudly in front of everyone. The bullying was loud, calculated, and directed with a purpose. They weren't just humiliating Kim Min-soo, they were trying to provoke Kwon Daegan, and it worked, but not in the way they expected. Hojong included Kwon Daegan in the game and tried to order him around too. But Kwon Daegan refused. He simply said he wasn't in the mood. His refusal wasn't loud, but it was enough to surprise the room. Laughter followed. It had been a long time since anyone said no. Hojong reached out and grabbed Kwon Daegan by the head, trying to assert dominance. But Kwon Daegan gave him one last warning. He told him to let go. The moment passed and then everything changed. With swift, explosive power, Kwon Daegan struck Hojong hard. Blow after blow landed with precision, and in moments, Hojong collapsed to the ground. Jungmin, the other bully, jumped in, throwing punches of his own. But Kwon Daegan didn't flinch. He responded with a single counterattack that dropped Jungmin. Instantly, Hojong, still conscious, stood up again and grabbed a chair. He raised it, ready to strike Kwon Daegan, but he didn't get the chance. Another powerful punch met him head-on and knocked him down again. The room was silent. The two bullies had been defeated easily. Their pride shattered. Their dominance ended in seconds. But Hojong laughed. Even in defeat, he tried to cling to control. He looked up from the floor and reminded Kwon Daegan that neither he nor Jungmin were the real boss of the class. And then, the door opened. A new figure entered, a presence different from the others. This was no Manhwa, the true leader. The one even the bullies obeyed. His arrival signaled that the real challenge was only just beginning. Out of nowhere, Monoxide Manhwa entered the classroom. His arrival changed the air. Whispers spread across the room as students quickly began speculating who would win the fight. Some believed Kwon Daegan might pull through again. Others weren't so sure. But one thing was clear. Something intense was about to unfold. No Manhwa stood calmly, showing no signs of aggression, yet his posture revealed everything. Though his expression was relaxed, his body was subtly coiled, perfectly aligned in a fighting stance that resembled kickboxing. He wasn't here just to talk, he was ready to strike at any moment. He looked at Kwon Daegan, asked for his name. Just as Kwon Daegan was about to respond, no Manhwa moved. Without warning, he launched forward, appearing to aim a kick toward Kwon Daegan's groin. Reacting instantly, Kwon Daegan raised his defenses, but it was a trick. Kwon Daegan had misread the move. There was no kick, only a fast, clean punch. No Manhwa struck directly, landing a hard blow on Kwon Daegan's face. The hit echoed through the room. Before no Manhwa could launch another flurry of attacks, Kwon Daegan had already adjusted. He read the pattern and countered with a precise strike. Kwon Daegan returned the hit, sending no Manhwa stumbling backward. Still, no Manhwa wasn't done. From the floor he laughed. There was no fear in his eyes, only a challenge. He stood up again, unwilling to back down. In a quick move, he threw an object toward Kwon Daegan, trying to distract him. It was a dirty tactic meant to break his concentration, and with that, no Manhwa continued his attacks. He used every trick in the book: feints, distractions, low blows. But it didn't matter. Despite the unorthodox fighting style, Kwon Daegan stayed in control. With clean, brutal precision, he broke through no Manhwa techniques. Each strike brought the fight closer to the end. Finally, Kwon Daegan landed a decisive blow. It was a strike that ended the fight completely. No Manhwa collapsed, unconscious. It was over. Kwon Daegan stood tall. He looked down at the three fallen Bullies Hojong Jongmin and No Manhwa. He ordered them to stand and line up. Though weak and battered, they obeyed. With calm authority, Kwon Daegan turned to the rest of the class. He made it clear if there were still Iljin among them, he would take them down, one by one. Elsewhere, the woman from the Golden Dragon Education Group continued watching. Her eyes were focused on Kwon Daegan. Every move he made, every fight he won, brought her closer to confirming he was the right choice for this project. Meanwhile, in another class, a different figure began to emerge. His name was Sangbo. Even though he wore a school uniform, tattoos stretched across his body like those of a Yakuza member. The marks were clear, and the aura around him was dangerous. He wasn't just another student. He had a reputation, and that reputation included defeating nitrogen monoxide, Manhwa. In the past, what Sangbo had done to nitrogen Manhwa wasn't a simple victory. He had treated him like a punching bag, beating him over and over again. There was no resistance, one-sided violence. And now, Bo seemed curious. He wanted to meet someone new, out of nowhere. No Manhwa entered the classroom. His arrival changed the air. Whispers spread across the room as students quickly began speculating who would win the fight. Some believed Kwon Daegan might pull through again. Others weren't so sure. But one thing was clear. Something intense was about to unfold. No Manhwa stood calmly, showing no signs of aggression, yet his posture revealed everything. Though his expression was relaxed, his body was subtly coiled, perfectly aligned in a fighting stance that resembled kickboxing. He wasn't here just to talk, he was ready to strike at any moment. He looked at Kwon Daegan, asked for his name. Just as Kwon Daegan was about to respond, No Manhwa moved. Without warning, he launched forward, appearing to aim a kick toward Kwon Daegan's groin. Reacting instantly, Kwon Daegan raised his defenses. But it was a trick. Kwon Daegan had misread the move. There was no kick, only a fast, clean punch. No Manhwa struck directly, landing a hard blow on Kwon Daegan's face. The hit echoed through the room. Before No Manhwa could launch another flurry of attacks, Kwon Daegan had already adjusted. He read the pattern and countered with a precise strike. Kwon Daegan returned the hit, sending No Manhwa stumbling backward. Still, No Manhwa wasn't done. From the floor, he laughed. There was no fear in his eyes, only a challenge. He stood up again, unwilling to back down. In a quick move, he threw an object toward Kwon Daegan, trying to distract him. It was a dirty tactic meant to break his concentration. And with that, No Manhwa continued his attacks. He used every trick in the book: feints, distractions, low blows. But it didn't matter. Despite the unorthodox fighting style, Kwon Daegan stayed in control. With clean, brutal precision, he broke through No Manhwa's techniques. Each strike brought the fight closer to the end. Finally, Kwon Daegan landed a decisive blow. It was a strike that ended the fight completely. No Manhwa collapsed, unconscious. It was over. Kwon Daegan stood tall. He looked down at the three fallen bullies Hojong Jongmin and No Manhwa. He ordered them to stand and line up. Though weak and battered, they obeyed. With calm authority, Kwon Daegan turned to the rest of the class. He made it clear if there were still Iljin among them, he would take them down, one by one. Elsewhere, the woman from the Golden Dragon Education Group continued watching. Her eyes were focused on Kwon Daegan. Every move he made, every fight he won, brought her closer to confirming he was the right choice for this project. Meanwhile, in another class, a different figure began to emerge. His name was Sangbo. Even though he wore a school uniform, tattoos stretched across his body, like those of a Yakuza member. The marks were clear, and the aura around him was dangerous. He wasn't just another student. He had a reputation, and that reputation included defeating No in the past. What Sangbo had done to No Manhwa wasn't a simple victory. He had treated him like a punching bag, beating him over and over again. There was no resistance, just one-sided violence. And now Songbo seemed curious. He wanted to meet someone new. On his second day back at school, Kwon Daegan approached the morning with a different mindset. The violent introductions from the day before were behind him. Now, he wanted to reconnect with what it meant to be a student again. His goal was simple: focus on studying and relive the parts of school life he had once missed. Despite the tension that lingered in the classroom, he was determined to turn his attention to academics. He borrowed a notebook from Kim Min-soo, his desk partner, and began reviewing the material. With focused eyes, he flipped through the pages and started copying notes while quietly observing the classroom dynamics. Even as the Iljin presence still loomed in the air, Kwon Daegan stayed calm and committed to keeping the classroom in order without conflict. At some point, one of the girls in the class tried to flirt with him. She leaned in with a playful tone, inviting him to join her at a jujutsu training studio. But Kwon Daegan, uninterested, simply replied with brief nods and short answers while continuing to write on the board. His attention never wavered, and, after failing to catch his interest, the girl eventually gave up and walked away. Meanwhile, nitrogen monoxide, Manhwa, still recovering from his defeat, was speaking to a few others. He admitted that even though Kwon Daegan had managed to defeat him, it wouldn't be so easy against the two other dominant figures in school: Sang Gabo from class 123 and Kim Mung-jung from class 122. Not long after Kim Mung-jung arrived, he entered the classroom confidently and wasted no time making a scene. He mocked No Manhwa, bringing up his humiliating loss. The remarks hit their mark, and No Manhwa, already agitated, started to lose control. The tension between the two grew quickly, their voices rising, their tempers flaring. A fight between them seemed inevitable. But before any blows were thrown, Kwon Daegan interrupted. Still seated at his desk, he reminded them that he was there to study and questioned why they were being so loud. The effect was immediate. Having already experienced Kwon Daegan's strength firsthand, No Manhwa sat down without a word. But Kim Mung-jung wasn't so easily silenced. Fueled by irritation and the desire to avenge his ally, he focused his attention on Kwon Daegan. He began to interfere. While Kwon Daegan tried to study, Kim Mung-jung moved closer and began provoking him. The annoyance grew. Then, Kwon Daegan reached out and grabbed one of Kim Mung-jung's fingers. With a firm grip, he squeezed until the pain was unmistakable. Kim Mung-jung could do nothing but groan and eventually apologize. Kwon Daegan let go and told him to leave before he changed his mind and made him lose the finger entirely, pretending to walk away. Kim Mung-jung instead circled around. He attempted a sneak attack, lunging from behind with a punch. But Kwon Daegan was prepared. He dodged the attack and retaliated with a single, devastating strike. The blow landed perfectly. Kim Mung-jung collapsed, unconscious, without emotion. Kwon Daegan ordered one of Kim Mung-jung's friends to carry him to the nurse's office. Before they left, he left a message. If Kim Mung-jung returned to being an Iljin, he would die by Kwon Daegan's hand. And just when the classroom seemed to settle again, the atmosphere shifted. From the door, another presence entered. It was Songbo, the rumored figure from class 123. Everything fell quiet. Even the students who had gotten used to chaos stopped moving. The moment had come, and it was clear that Kwon Daegan's plans to continue his studies would have to wait. The notebook lay open on the desk, but it would stay untouched for now, because, this time, it seemed the next fight couldn't be avoided. The tension in the classroom shifted again when Songbo appeared at the door. He entered not alone, but accompanied by several of his followers. The moment he stepped in, the atmosphere thickened. Without saying much, he made his presence felt. His eyes scanned the room before settling on Kwon Daegan, without asking. He walked toward Kwon Daegan's desk. He didn't ask for a seat, he made one. Kim Min-soo, who had been sitting next to Kwon Daegan, was silently forced to stand. With barely a word, Songbo claimed the empty spot. His body relaxed into the chair, but his tone carried warning. He began to speak, trying to provoke Kwon Daegan, mocking his decision to focus on studying, and poking at his attempt to live like a regular student. But Kwon Daegan didn't back down. His response was cold, sharp, and calculated. His words struck a nerve. Sangbo, clearly irritated, straightened up and extended a challenge. He proposed a fight after school. From behind, no Manhwa attempted to speak up. He tried to offer insight, possibly information he thought might help Kwon Daegan prepare, but Kwon Daegan made it clear that he didn't need anything from him. Still, no Manhwa kept talking, ignoring the rejection. He continued explaining as if he hadn't heard anything, determined to share what he knew, in a different classroom. While that conversation lingered, Sangbo was seen sparring with weaker students. He struck them without hesitation, treating them like nothing more than punching bags. They didn't fight back. His blows landed cleanly, over and over, as if punishing them for existing in the same space. It wasn't training, it was domination. Later, during lunch break, Kwon Daegan and no Manhwa sat together, eating quietly. Curious, Kwon Daegan asked a simple question: if no Manhwa had once beaten Sangbo, why did he appear so afraid whenever Sangbo was around? The question lingered in the air for a moment before no Manhwa answered truthfully. He explained everything. He admitted that in a past fight with Sangbo he had been cornered. The situation had gotten desperate, and in that moment, he made it dishonorable. Mufi had grabbed and squeezed Sangbo's groin. It wasn't a victory of strength or technique. It was a cheap shot, and though it had given him the win, it came with fear that lingered ever since. Across the cafeteria, others were eating and talking casually. But some students, sitting nearby, decided to act out. They began picking food from their own trays, and throwing whatever they didn't like onto Kwon Daegan's tray. It was deliberate. Their faces showed no shame. Their intention was clear. But Kwon Daegan wasn't amused. The disrespect wasn't just an annoyance, it was a direct insult. Rage simmered beneath his composed expression. His patience was wearing thin, and the way they treated him like someone to be ignored or mocked pushed him toward the edge. The day wasn't over yet, and the real confrontation was still waiting. The atmosphere in the cafeteria had shifted. The room buzzed with tension. Whispers spread quickly as more and more students turned their eyes toward Kwon Daegan. The sudden clash earlier, when food had been thrown onto his tray, had made everyone expect a fight. The student responsible was already trembling, his face pale with fear. And Kwon Daegan looked like he was just moments away from unleashing his fury. Then, unexpectedly, a phone began to ring. The sound came from Kwon Daegun's pocket. He reached in and answered. It was the director, the same director who had initiated the Iljin, in charge of Iljin operation. The voice on the line reminded him of the terms. This operation, while giving him full freedom, still had boundaries. If anything got out of hand, if things escalated too far, the entire mission would be shut down. And with it, Kwon Daegun's chance to live differently would vanish. His life would return to what it was before. Empty, directionless, ordinary though. The program offered freedom, it came with responsibility. And in that moment, Kwon Daegan held himself back. He turned away from the frightened students. He didn't strike. He let them go. Around the cafeteria, students watching began to respond. Some were disappointed, expecting to witness another brutal showdown. Others were relieved, thankful the situation hadn't gotten out of control. After leaving the cafeteria, Kwon Daegan walked toward his classroom. On the way, he spotted the same student who had disrespected him earlier. Their eyes met again. This time, Kwon Daegan didn't let it pass. He gave a stern warning. He made it clear that there would be no second chances if the disrespect continued. But the student, instead of backing down, delivered a warning of his own. He told Kwon Daegan that Sangbo was coming for him. Without hesitation, Kwon Daegan grabbed the student and led him away from the main school grounds. They walked to a secluded area behind the school building, quiet, empty, and out of sight. There, Kwon Daegan delivered a beating. He didn't speak much, but the message was clear. Afterward, he told the student to call his boss. He wanted Sangbo, but the student replied that Sangbo was busy. He wasn't hiding, he was simply doing what he always did. Right now, he was beating. On his punching bags, the weak students he used for practice. The thought of it lit a fire in Kwon Daegan. The rage he had tried to suppress. earlier returned with intensity. He didn't wait. Kwon marched straight to class 1-3, inside. Sangbo noticed his arrival. He asked why he was there. Kwon didn't hesitate. He demanded to know why Sangbo used weak students as his punching bags. Why not test himself against someone strong? The two exchanged sharp words, and the tension rose with each passing second. Then, Kwon stepped forward and issued a challenge of his own. He asked if Sangbo wanted to see what it looked like to punch a real target. He turned his gaze to one of Sangbo's men, a follower, who looked powerful and well-built. Without warning, Kwon threw a single punch. It landed perfectly. The student dropped instantly, unconscious on the floor. The classroom fell silent. The blow wasn't just physical, it was a direct insult to Sangbo. A declaration of strength. A humiliation, and Sangbo was furious. The atmosphere inside class 1-3 was charged with a different kind of tension. Sangbo stood silently, observing the unconscious body of his largest subordinate, who had just been dropped with a single punch from Kwon. His emotions were mixed at the loss, but also a deep curiosity. That one strike had shown him something rare in that moment. Sangbo made up his mind. The fight wouldn't wait. He declared the battle would happen now. Without hesitation, he ordered his classmates to clear the desks and chairs, creating an open space inside the classroom. A makeshift ring was formed. The classroom transformed into a battleground, and word of the confrontation spread rapidly. The name Kwon was already echoing through the halls, but now it was louder than ever. Students from every corner of the school began rushing toward class 1-3. Feet pounded against the floor as whispers turned into a wave of movement. The school was alive with anticipation. Inside the classroom, Sangbo looked at his opponent with confidence. In his eyes, Kwon was still just a new student. Despite defeating no Manhwa, he believed Kwon lacked true skill. This fight would prove it. The battle began. Sangbo took the initiative. He launched the first attack, stepping in with swift, powerful strikes. Kwon moved with calculated precision, dodging each hit. It didn't take him long to recognize the style. Sangbo was an outboxer, someone who relied on distance, speed, and clean strikes. As the exchange continued, Kwon became more certain Sangbo wasn't ordinary. His natural instincts and incredible speed weren't something that could be taught. He was gifted. Still, Kwon stayed composed, waiting for an opening. He found one. He countered with a strong punch, though Sangbo managed to block the hit. The impact traveled through his arm. His hand trembled. The pain was real, and the power behind Kwon strikes was unlike anything he had felt before. Even so, Sangbo pushed on. He believed he had read Kwon patterns. He launched another series of punches, confident in his rhythm. But Kwon shifted strategy. He dropped low and began throwing sharp, continuous low kicks. Each one slammed into Sangbo's legs, cutting into his balance and forcing him to his knees, kneeling on the floor. Sangbo looked up. Kwon didn't back away. He stood tall, commanding him to get up, not out of cruelty, but because he understood who he was dealing with. Sangbo wasn't the kind of person who begged. He was the kind that crushed others under his heel. And now, his pride was being crushed. In return, the humiliation was unbearable. As Sangbo forced himself to rise, Kwon struck again. He focused on Sangbo's left leg, targeting it with more low kicks. The pain intensified with each hit. When Sangbo finally shifted his guard to protect his leg, Kwon changed targets, throwing punches instead. His control of the fight was absolute. Frustration boiled inside Sangbo. The attacks didn't stop. The pressure was suffocating. And then came a brutal kick aimed right at his center. The impact sent a shock through the room. The sound of it echoed as students gasped in disbelief. Everyone expected Sangbo to collapse and stay down. But to their amazement, he stood again. His body swayed, battered and beaten, but he didn't fall. Across the school, behind a monitor, the head of the organization overseeing the Iljan operation watched from a surveillance camera. The fight wasn't just a disciplinary matter anymore. It had become something else, something fascinating. Sangbo could barely stay on his feet. His left leg, once the foundation of his deadly footwork, had been battered to the point of near collapse. Each time he shifted his weight, pain shot through his body like electricity. He clenched his jaw, trying to endure it, but the damage was already done. To anyone watching, it was obvious his legs were broken tools now. For a boxer, punches were the bullets, but footwork was the gun that launched them. Without mobility, even the fastest fists meant nothing. And Sangbo wasn't just good. He had been born for this. He had always possessed a special kind of talent. While most fighters had to build their skills slowly, Sangbo had been fast from the beginning. His movements were natural, his reactions sharp, and his coordination flawless. It was as if he had been built to fight. He never needed to think twice about his steps. His body moved before his mind caught up. But now that gift was gone. Kwon Daegan had shattered it. Through sharp, repeated low kicks, Kwon Daegan had dismantled Sangbo's foundation. It wasn't just physical damage, it was psychological. San Jibyo's pride, rooted in his mastery of movement, was now crushed beneath him. In the world of boxing, this was already a loss. The weapon had been stripped away. And yet Sangbo refused to yield. With trembling legs, he charged forward once more. He launched punch after punch, pushing past the limits of his pain. His arms flailed forward with speed, but not precision. What had once been calculated became desperate. Each jab and hook lacked the balance they once carried. His rhythm was broken. Still, he came forward, as if trying to prove to himself that he wasn't finished. But Kwon Daegan didn't retreat. He had already seized control of the rhythm, and this was his fight now. As Sangbo advanced, Kwon Daegan calmly evaded the strikes. Then came the counters, powerful, clean, and devastating. One after another, his fists found their target. They slammed into Sangbo's ribs, shoulders, jaw. Each blow made Sangbo stumble. His body jerked with every impact. The classroom echoed with the sound of fists hitting flesh too. To the watching students packed around the room, it was no longer a fair fight. It was domination. Sangbo, once feared for his power, now looked like a sandbag being used for practice. And somewhere in the haze of pain, Sangbo remembered. Back in middle school, when he had first picked up boxing gloves, he trained with intensity. His coach had recognized his raw talent. Every day he punched until his knuckles bled. He could memorize combinations instantly. He could spar older students and still win. But there was something off. He didn't fight to test himself. He didn't fight to improve. What thrilled him wasn't the art, it was the control. Even then, his eyes weren't on worthy opponents. He sought out weaker kids, ones who couldn't hit back. He punched them not to train, but to dominate. When adults told him to stop using his fists for bullying, he had nodded obediently. But his heart wasn't in their warnings. He continued anyway, hiding behind charm and excuses. To him, power meant hurting those beneath him. Now, it was all reversed. Kwon Daegan was relentless. He pummeled Sangbo with force and precision, turning him into the very thing he had once created in others. A helpless target. Finally, Sangbo collapsed. His body crumpled to the floor like a broken doll. His hands twitched slightly, but he didn't rise. His chest heaved as he tried to catch his breath. Sweat poured from his face. His vision blurred. The thought hit him like one of Kwon Daegan's punches. He couldn't win. He truly couldn't. Above him stood Kwon Daegan, towering like a shadow. He didn't move. He didn't shout. Instead, he gave him a countdown. 10 seconds. That was all Sangbo had. 10 seconds to prove that he still had something left. 10 seconds to fight for his pride. 10 seconds to rise again, not as a bully, not as a boxer, but as someone who wouldn't be remembered as a broken shell on the floor. But Kwon Daegan didn't wait with pity. He looked at Sangbo and called him what he had always called others: a punching bag. An unusual silence filled class 1-2-3. A sight no one expected was unfolding before their eyes. Sangbo, the once dominant and feared figure of the class, was now kneeling. The same Sangbo who had always controlled others with violence and intimidation was now trembling in fear. His head hung low, his body broken not only by bruises, but by humiliation. The classroom, which had once echoed with his voice, was now filled with whispers and disbelief among the students. One of Sangbo's closest friends looked on with a heavy expression. He understood something the others didn't. Sangbo wasn't. Born fearless, he was terrified of getting hurt. His bullying had never been about power for power's sake. It was fear, disguised as strength. A desperate need to avoid pain. A need to be seen as invincible, so that no one would ever dare to strike him first. Watching this unfold, that friend stepped forward. He urged Kwon Daegan to stop. He pleaded for an end, and admitted defeat on Sangbo's behalf. Around the room, the students were stunned. No one dared speak loudly. They had never seen Sangbo this way. And now they had witnessed something greater, the overwhelming strength of Kwon Daegan. It was a strength beyond comprehension, with calm steps and an unreadable expression. Kwon Daegan turned and walked out of class 123. His presence remained, even after he had gone. One by one, the students followed, leaving the broken image of Sangbo behind. Some whispered that this was the end for him, that Sangbo would never rise again. But deep inside, Sangbo swore silently. He refused to let this be his defeat. He would not be crushed like this again. Elsewhere, far from the chaos of the classroom, Manager Lee and the CEO sat before a large screen. The footage of Kwon Daegan's fight had been streamed in real time, and the CEO leaned forward with fascination. The performance had been beyond expectation. The potential of both Kwon Daegan and the Iljin in charge of Iljin operation was undeniable. But there was disagreement. Manager Lee had built the operation around careful rules and limited authority. She believed structure was necessary to prevent chaos. But the CEO saw things differently. He found her rules outdated, too rigid. He wanted Kwon Daegan unleashed. No restrictions, no chains. Let him fight as he wished. Let him dominate freely. There. Discussion turned into a debate. Manager Lee resisted at first, still believing in her methods. But the CEO's vision was persuasive, and eventually, she gave in. She agreed to allow more freedom for Kwon Daegan, accepting that perhaps the results would speak louder than structure. Back at school, a ripple effect had begun. The fall of Sangbo had not gone unnoticed. Rumors of Kwon Daegan's strength were spreading rapidly. And now, the leaders of other first-year classes were beginning to move. From class 1 to 4 came Park Dojin, a tall, muscular student who looked like he lived in the gym. His body radiated strength. From class 1 to 9 came Lee Sung-hoon, a quiet, bookish boy in glasses, known for being a top student in a university prep class. But there was something strange behind his eyes. From class 1 to 5 emerged UGCOC.com and unreadable. While from class 1 to 6 came Beek Suzy, the only girl among the group. She wasn't called the queen of her class without reason. Each of them began to make their own moves. Meanwhile, Kwon Daegan had joined Minho and the others as they walked together. They talked and laughed, planning to hang out after school. But just as the mood began to rise, Kwon Daegan remembered his promise to Manager Lee. He spotted her familiar black car waiting by the side of the road. Without hesitation, he turned down the invitation to join his group and approached the car. He entered and was driven away. From a short distance, a girl watched the vehicle disappear. Her name was Ji Aina. She recognized the car and, more importantly, she recognized the woman inside it, Manager Lee. Her eyes narrowed as her thoughts raced. Something was strange. Why was that woman, the one known for running secretive programs, spending time with the new student? A question filled her mind. What exactly was Manager Lee planning this time? Inside the car, the city lights passed silently through the windows. The air was calm, but the thoughts racing through Kwon Daegan's mind were not. He sat next to Manager Lee, aware of the weight of everything he had done in just a short time. Since returning to school, from his first day, he had fought his way through multiple classes, leaving behind chaos and defeated Iljin. Deep inside, he knew there had to be consequences. He expected punishments, some kind of penalty for breaking whatever rules had been set. But to his surprise, Manager Lee reassured him. Not only did she express approval, but she explained that the rules had been changed. From this point on, Kwon Dagon would no longer be limited. He was now free to act however he wanted. There were no more boundaries, no more conditions. The leash had been removed. The feeling that followed was something Kwon Dagon hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom, complete and unchecked freedom to act. Still, a question remained in his mind. How did Manager Lee know everything that had happened in school? How had she seen the details of his fights, his actions, and his choices? He looked at her, but her silence was all the answer he received. Soon after, the car stopped. They arrived at a new Plaza modern apartment building. As they walked inside, Kwon Dagon looked around, impressed. It was clean, furnished, and far more comfortable than his home had ever been. He was told he would live here now. There was a sofa, a soft bed, and an overall warmth he wasn't used to. This would be his new base, and Manager Lee would be staying there as well, trying to lighten the mood. Kwon Dagon made a playful remark about sharing a room, but the atmosphere immediately shifted. Manager Lee shot him a cold glare that erased any humor in the moment. The answer was clear, and it left him embarrassed. Without another word, she handed him a Carter resource for buying anything he needed for daily life. Then she left, citing other duties that needed her attention, but she didn't go far beyond the apartment walls. In a room hidden from sight, Manager Lee sat alone. A large monitor glowed in front of her, displaying multiple live camera feeds. Every corner of the apartment was being watched. Kwon Dagon was never truly alone. The next morning at school, the consequences of his actions finally caught up with him, at least formally. Inside the teacher's office, Kwon Dagon stood before a furious instructor. The teacher's voice rose sharply, criticizing him for the fights he had caused on his very first day. No excuses were allowed. Kwon Dagon stood silently, absorbing the scolding, letting it wash over him. He was tired of being lectured, but he endured it nonetheless. Elsewhere in the school, Gianna stood before a board, being honored as the top-performing student. She accepted her award with grace, but her attention wasn't on the praise. Her eyes wandered toward Kwon Dagon, who she spotted in the teacher's office being reprimanded. Confusion filled her thoughts. If she was the one who had sent Kwon Dagon, then why was he being treated like an ordinary student? Why was he getting yelled at like any troublemaker? Something didn't add up, and the questions inside her continued to grow. In class 1 to 6, tension stirred among the students. Kim Won-woong, the class leader, was being updated by his subordinates. They informed him that Kwon Dagon had become a serious problem, and his name was being discussed in every hallway. But Kim Won-woong remained calm. He sat at his desk, staring at the game on his phone. Without lifting his eyes, he responded, "There was no need for a big reaction yet. Let the new kid keep doing what he wanted." There was no point in stirring things up unnecessarily. As he continued playing, his concentration was broken by a careless interruption. The game was lost. Frustrated, he lashed out, striking the subordinate who had spoken. Then, without looking back, he ordered everyone to leave the classroom. But as they walked out, Kim Won-woong leaned back in his chair. His confidence hadn't been shaken. He had no intention of confronting Kwon Dagon directly. There were other ways, and he had no plans to use his own hands just yet. The morning air at school felt calm and familiar as Kwon Dagon entered the classroom. He took his seat beside Kim Min-soo, settling into his usual spot. What caught his attention, though, was something unexpected. Kim Min-soo was wearing glasses. Immediately, Kwon Dagon grew suspicious. He couldn't help but wonder if those glasses were hiding something. A camera, maybe. Was Kim Min-soo secretly one of Manager Lee's agents, sent to observe him closely? The thought crept deeper into his mind, but Kim Min-soo sensed the suspicion and casually explained his reason. He admitted that he usually didn't wear glasses at school. He was afraid they would make him a target for bullies. That's why he had kept them off until now. As he adjusted the frames on his face, Kwon Dagon watched silently. Then, for a moment, he felt embarrassed. There was nothing strange, no hidden device, just a nervous classmate trying to survive in a school full of predators. His paranoia had made him read too far into something innocent. At the front of the classroom, a student's eyes lingered on Kwon Daegan. Curiosity shone in their gaze. Despite the rumors and the fighting, there was something surprisingly ordinary about him. He sat quietly, focused on his work, blending in like any other student who cared about his studies. From across the room, Gianna turned her head. Her friend Era leaned in and teased her. She assumed that Gianna was simply staring at the new transfer student because he was handsome. And while Gianna didn't argue, the truth was more complicated. Her curiosity ran deeper than appearances. When the final bell rang and the school day ended, Kwon Daegan left the building behind him. Gianna followed. It hadn't been a sudden decision. Earlier, she had spoken with Ara, and that conversation had changed everything. Ara, as it turned out, wasn't just observant. She was obsessed. She had an entire archive of information about every attractive boy in the school. Names, addresses, routines, even the exact path Kwon Daegan used to walk home. Her knowledge was unsettling, and her personality bordered on obsessive. But Gianna had chosen to follow Kwon Daegan alone. She didn't want to risk feeding any rumors. She just wanted to confirm a few things for herself. Quietly, she tailed him from a distance, careful not to be seen. However, she wasn't the only one with eyes on Kwon Daegan. Elsewhere, Kim Won-woong had gathered with his crew. They were planning. They knew now that brute strength alone wouldn't be enough. Even with 5 of them, facing Kwon Daegan head-on would be foolish. A new plan had to be made. When the decision was finalized, Kim Won-woong left the rest in charge. The ambush was now in their hands. They had done their homework. Kwon Daegan always walked home using the same route, a narrow path just beyond the school. And just like they predicted, he appeared. The 4 of them began to trail him, blending into the shadows and keeping their distance. But someone else noticed the movement. Gianna. Her eyes widened. She recognized them. They weren't just passing by. They were following him. Panic rose in her chest. Her cautious footsteps grew quicker as she tried to close the distance between herself and Kwon Daegan, careful not to get caught. But one of the 4 noticed her. He looked back, catching her presence. Misreading the situation entirely, he assumed she had been following him instead. He approached her, amused and smug, assuming her interest was personal, as he spoke. Gianna's instincts took over. She sprayed water into his face, whether from a bottle or a small container she had with her hand, made enough of a scene to draw attention. The commotion broke the formation of the 4 boys, throwing their plan into disarray. At that moment, Kwon Daegan turned. He had sensed something strange behind him. Now, as he glanced back, he saw a girl, clearly distressed, surrounded by boys. Her expression showed a mixture of fear and desperation. She was nearly in tears, and Kwon Daegan understood instantly. There was trouble. The late afternoon air was heavy with tension as Kwon Daegan stood face to face with the 4 students who had been trailing him. They surrounded Gianna, their intimidation obvious, their intentions clear. Without hesitation, Kwon Daegan stepped between them and her, his expression calm but sharp with purpose. He acknowledged their presence, noting aloud that he was already busy and didn't have time to waste. Still, he proposed that, if they wanted to finish this, they should change locations. Somewhere quieter, somewhere without an audience. He was aware they had been following him for a while. He knew this wasn't a coincidence. The 4 assailants exchanged glances. They were confident. 4 against 1. Their numbers gave them the illusion of strength. So, without protest, they followed him, elsewhere, down a narrow alleyway not far from the confrontation. 2 students from Banggoon Technical School stood by Jungman and Cha Jinwoo. They had been holding the space, waiting, and when Kwon Daegan arrived with the 4 students in tow, they recognized immediately what was about to happen. They didn't want to interfere, acknowledging Woong, the leader orchestrating events behind the scenes. The 2 students from Banggoon, quietly, surrendered the alley. They stepped aside, leaving the secluded space to Kwon Daegan and his would-be attackers. At that same moment, inside a bustling internet cafe, Yu Ji-seok, and Kim Won-woong sat in front of glowing screens, playing their usual game. But Yu Ji-seok couldn't focus. He was anxious about the 4 students they had sent to intercept Kwon Dagen. The plan felt reckless, but Kim Won-woong remained calm. He had faith in the strategy. He believed his preparations were enough to break through Kwon Dagen's defenses. Back in the alley, the fight was moments away from breaking out. Kwon Dagen stood still, giving the signal for the battle to begin. One of the 4, the biggest among them, stepped forward, his presence imposing. He ignored Kwon Dagen's warnings, treating the moment with overconfidence and arrogance. That was his mistake. With little effort, Kwon Dagen shoved him back hard, knocking him off balance. The next moment, his fist connected with the student's head in a brutal, clean strike, dropping him to the ground with a thud. The other 3 froze. The display of power had been overwhelming. Still, they couldn't back down now. They moved together, approaching Kwon Dagen with nervous determination, but their feet hesitated. Their minds questioned the odds, and then it began. Before they could organize, Kwon Dagen struck first. He launched forward like a storm, fists flying, striking. One, then another, moving with precision and power. One by one, the 3 fell, unable to defend against the relentless assault. In mere moments, all 4 lay defeated. The alley fell silent. Back at the internet cafe, Kim Won-woong's phone buzzed. A brief pause followed as he checked the message. The report was simple and clear. All 4 had lost. His expression didn't change. There was no anger, no surprise, only quiet acceptance, as if it was just one part of a larger game still in motion. Inside a vast, empty void that existed only within the fractured mind of the defeated student, panic reigned. The large boy who had first charged toward Kwon Dagen now found himself hallucinating, running endlessly through a blank white room. Behind him, in that haunting illusion, Kwon Dagen chased him without a word, his gaze locked and terrifying. The boy's legs trembled beneath him as he fled, knowing no escape. Eventually, like prey caught by a predator, he was overtaken, and then it was over. He blinked into reality, breathless and drenched in fear, only to find Kwon Dagen standing over him, shaking him back to consciousness. The haze of the illusion vanished, replaced by the cold truth of defeat. Kwon Dagen ordered the 4 boys to stand. Groggy and bruised, they obeyed, forming a line before him in silence. Without raising his voice, he demanded their phone numbers. One by one, they handed them over, to beaten, to protest. Finally, Kwon Dagen delivered his message clearly. Tomorrow, at school, Kim Won-woong was to meet him face to face. From a distance, hidden in the shadows, 2 other students watched the aftermath unfold. They were the same students from Bongun Technical School, quiet observers of this entire encounter. As Kwon Dagen walked away, they pulled out their phones and relayed the results directly to Kim Won-woong. Their message was straightforward. All 4 had lost. The news startled Kim Won-woong. Even though he already understood Kwon Dagen's strength, he hadn't anticipated this. The speed and decisiveness of the defeat caught him off guard. The next day arrived. Inside the classroom, Kwon Dagen waited patiently. The clock ticked through the hours, first period, second period, and into the third. Still, there was no sign of Kim Won-woong. Growing restless, Kwon Dagen stood and decided to confront the matter himself. He walked toward class 1 to 6, entering the room with his usual calm, calculated presence. Students glanced his way, some out of curiosity, others out of unease. Inside, he spotted a large boy, Jinmo. Approaching him, Kwon Dagen asked where Kim Won-woong was, but Jinmo didn't recognize him at first. The glasses Kwon Dagen wore masked his features, and Jinmo was confused. Only after Kwon Dagen touched his arm did realization dawn. A visible change came over him as he recognized who stood before him. At that moment, Baek Suzy, known throughout the school as the Queen of Class 1 to 6, stepped forward. Her tone was sharp, her posture confident. She asked why Kwon Dagen had caused a disturbance in another class. Unmoved, Kwon Dagen responded coolly, brushing off her involvement. Suddenly, Baek Suzy raised her hand and slapped him across the face. The blow was loud and unexpected. His glasses fell to the floor, but Kwon Daegan did not retaliate. He remained composed, bending down slowly to retrieve his glasses. His only concern was whether they had been damaged. As he stood back up and adjusted them, Baek Suzy caught a full glimpse of his face without obstruction. Her breath hitched. For a moment her world paused. The boy she had just struck was, in her eyes, incredibly handsome. Before the atmosphere could settle, a sharp noise echoed from the back of the classroom. Jin Mo, still disoriented, was suddenly kicked from behind and then struck. The person responsible stepped forward. It was Kim Won-woong. Casually, but confidently, he introduced himself to Kwon Daegan, marking the beginning of a new confrontation. Inside the classroom, a charged silence filled the air as Kim Won-woong stood calmly, staring directly at Kwon Daegan, with a casual tone and no trace of intimidation. He asked whether Kwon Daegan had been looking for him, and if so, what business he had. There was no answer, at least not a verbal one. Without a moment's hesitation, Kwon Daegan raised his fist and drove it forward toward Kim Won-woong's face with full intent. It was a punch that carried no warning, only resolution. Kim Won-woong, realizing too late that he couldn't dodge, braced himself for impact, surrendering to the oncoming force. But just before the fist made contact, it was stopped by Yoo Ji-seok, who had leaped between them. His hands gripped Kwon Daegan's arm, halting the attack mid-air. But even in that instant, Ji-seok's expression twisted with shock. The sheer power behind Kwon Daegan's punch wasn't just overwhelming, it was unnatural. Trying to restrain him was like trying to hold back a boulder rolling downhill. As Ji-seok attempted to restrain him further, even contemplating a throw to neutralize the situation, he quickly realized that he couldn't lift Kwon Daegan at all. The strength disparity was beyond anything he had prepared for. Elsewhere in the room, tension brewed in a different form. Jinmo, who had been targeted earlier, was once again being struck by Kim Won-woong. Slaps and fists landed without hesitation. As Won-woong vented his frustration, he insisted that he had not ordered Ginmo to tail Kwon Daegan the previous day. His violence came with denial, as if trying to shift blame while still asserting dominance. Back in his mind, Kwon Daegan pieced the events together. The puzzle pointed directly at Kim Won-woong. He knew this was the one behind the ambush from yesterday. But with no solid proof, no confession, and no witnesses willing to speak, Kwon Daegan chose not to press forward. For now, he turned away without a word and walked out of the classroom, leaving the others behind. Afterward, Yoo Ji-seok quietly approached Kim Won-woong, offering him advice. He suggested that Won-woong avoid handling this kind of problem with his own hands. The advice was not out of concern for others, but out of strategy. And Won-woong, considering the situation, agreed. He decided a different approach was needed. Back in class, Kwon Daegan sat at his desk, his mind churning. He pondered what strategy Kim Won-woong might resort to next. A direct confrontation had failed. Now the enemy would likely shift tactics and moves, unexpected counters. Outside the classroom, the consequences of failure played out harshly. The four boys who had previously been defeated by Kwon Daegan were lined up and beaten by Kim Won-woong himself. The punishment was brutal, and each of them was warned sternly. Soon after, a new plan was set in motion. Kim Won-woong made a phone call, this time to a student from Bangun Technical School. He didn't ask for advice, he asked for numbers. Reinforcements, bodies strong enough to overwhelm Kwon Daegan through sheer volume. The student from Bangun listened, but he did not accept immediately. He offered a condition in return for assistance. He wanted something. More specifically, he wanted someone. He demanded that Jiina, the girl who had been seen with Kwon Daegan and Won-woong's for subordinates, be brought along. The reasoning behind the request wasn't explained, but it was clear it held weight for him. Ginmo, who had been quiet through most of the meeting, raised an objection. He was visibly uncomfortable with the idea of involving a girl in their escalating conflict. It crossed a line even he was hesitant to blur. But his opinion was drowned out. Kim Won-woong had already made up his mind, and so, despite Jinmo's unease, the plan was confirmed. The next phase of the conflict was about to begin. Kim Won-wung believed the tides had turned in his favor. With his recent maneuvers set in motion, he now set his sights on controlling class 1 to 9. In his mind, that class was nothing more than a collection of overachieving bookworms, too absorbed in their studies to resist. Gaining dominance there, he thought, would be simple. But first, he needed to tie up loose ends. He summoned Ginmo and gave him a task: lure both Kwon-dagon and Jiina to a predetermined location. Ginmo began his approach carefully. He walked up to Kwon-dagon with a casual demeanor and attempted to coax him into coming along. Initially, Kwon-dagon declined, uninterested in whatever vague excuse Ginmo had. But Ginmo, undeterred, changed tactics. This time he offered to treat him to TTEOKBOKA. It worked. Kwon-dagon, believing Ginmo might have turned over a new leaf and harbored no ill intent, accepted the invitation. The prospect of free food, coupled with the assumption of good faith, lowered his guard. Next, Ginmo approached Jiina, extending the same invitation. She rejected him almost immediately, her tone sharper and firmer. But Ginmo, sticking to his plan, pressed further, mentioning that Kwon-dagon would also be there, and that it was his treat. Still, Jiina refused. However, her resolve started to waver when Ara, her persistent friend, stepped in and encouraged her to go. Eventually, with mounting pressure and curiosity, Jiina reluctantly agreed. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, preparations were underway. The delinquents from Banggoon Technical School had been gathering strength in numbers. They had waited long enough, and now the bait was being brought right to them. Jinmo's role was to deliver both Kwon-dagon and Jiina directly into their trapped out. As they walked toward the intended meeting spot, Kwon-dagon began to sense something was off. The streets became quieter, the stores shuttered, the atmosphere heavier. It was too still, too perfect. He turned to Ginmo, questioning him about the strange location. But Ginmo clearly panicked, offered flimsy excuses, trying to keep his composure. His fear was palpable. It only fueled Kwon-daeun's suspicions further. Then it became clear from the shadows and alleys. Dozens of delinquents emerged. Students from Banggoon stood with arms crossed and gazes locked. They had been waiting in. Now they surrounded the three. Ginmo, unable to maintain the lie, dropped to his knees. With his forehead nearly to the pavement, he begged for forgiveness. The shame and fear were overwhelming, but the damage had already been done. Kwon-dagon had walked straight into the trap. Beside him, Jiina stood in disbelief. Shock turned into anger. She too had been tricked. But there was no time for explanation, no moment for escape. The fight was about to begin. From within the crowd stepped a towering figure, Min Byung-kwon, the largest and most imposing of the Banggoon gang. Muscles coiled, fists clenched, and eyes gleaming with anticipation. The rumors surrounding Kwon-dagon's strength had reached him, and now, finally, he had the chance to test them for himself. The air grew tense. There would be no running, no more tricks, just a clash of power, brutal, unfiltered, and inevitable. The tension in the air was suffocating. The alley, lined with worn brick walls and flickering streetlights, became the silent stage for an impending storm. Standing at the center of it all was Kwon-dagon, his posture calm but radiating fury, his fists hanging low but ready to strike. Across from him, towering with a smug grin plastered on his thick face, stood Min Byung-kwon, one of the largest and most feared delinquents from Banggoon Technical School. The whispers among the students, watching from behind, were full of confidence. They spoke of Min Byung-kwon as if he were a legend. His massive body, honed from years of street fights, was often enough to intimidate opponents before a punch was even thrown. They had seen him crush challengers with ease, tossing aside fighters like broken mannequins. And now, facing this newcomer, they fully expected the same. But Kwon-dagon wasn't like anyone they had seen. Min Byung-kwon couldn't stop talking. His voice filled the alley, taunting and belittling, trying to provoke a reaction. It was a common tactic, psychological warfare before fists were thrown. But Kwon-dagon had no patience for empty words. Annoyed and unamused, he fired back a sharp, cold retort. It wasn't loud, but it was piercing enough to sting. It hit harder than expected. Min Byung-kwon's confidence twisted into anger. With a loud grunt, he stepped forward, his feet cracking against the pavement as he charged. But his momentum came to a sudden, humiliating stop. Kwon Dagen, without so much as flinching, reached out and locked him in an American grip. His arm coiled around Byung-kwon's neck like a vice, lifting his massive body with terrifying control. In seconds, the fight was over. The biggest threat among them collapsed, subdued without resistance. Gasps erupted. What they thought would be a one-sided victory had turned into a swift and brutal defeat. But Kwon Dagen wasn't done. His rage simmered beneath his still exterior. This ambush was not just cowardly, it was disgraceful. They had involved people who had nothing to do with him. They dragged in the innocent, all to satisfy their pride. That line had been crossed. Then came the next wave. Dozens of students began to encircle him. The alley narrowed with the sheer number of feet moving into formation. The noise died down, replaced by the eerie silence of footsteps and determined breathing. It was clear they had a strategy. If brute strength failed, numbers would overwhelm. One couldn't guard every direction at once. The ring tightened. Kwon Dagen scanned every face, every twitch, every breath. His fists clenched. His legs shifted. He knew what was coming. And then they came. The second wave of students from Banggoon surged forward. More bodies, more fists, more fury. Kwon Dagen moved like a machine. Every punch he threw was a calculated burst of power, every movement sharp and efficient. But even he was human. The pressure began to show. There were too many, too fast, too close. A punch grazed his side. A kick clipped his leg. Blood surged through his veins like fire. Then came salvation. From behind the crowd, new voices broke. Through the chaos, Kim Min-soo appeared first, pushing through the mob with his usual timid yet determined expression. Behind him came Minho, brash and loud as always, followed by others who had come to respect Kwon Dagen, those who had once fought him and now chose to fight beside him. Without hesitation, they dove into the fray. The crowd split, fists clashed, shoes scraped. The alley turned into a full-blown battlefield, chaotic and unforgiving. Kwon Dagen, bloodied and breathing hard, felt the tide begin to turn. He was no longer alone, and that changed everything. He moved again, striking faster, harder, sharper, his fury now fueled by unity. He dodged the attacks more cleanly. He countered with precision. Around him, his allies held their ground. Every punch thrown by Kim Min-soo, every kick from Minho, reminded him that strength wasn't just in fist, was in those who stood beside you still. The enemy was relentless, but so was he. And in that dark, narrow alley where chaos reigned, Kwon Dagen carved out his place not just as a fighter, but as the force that no one, not even dozens of delinquents, could take down without paying the price. The moment Minho appeared in the chaos-filled alley, everyone, friend and foe, alike froze in confusion. Kwon Dagen, bloodied and breathing hard, turned his head in disbelief. He hadn't expected backup beyond Kim Min-soo and the others. The timing was too perfect, too precise. It was as if Minho had known exactly what would happen, and he had. Behind Minho stood his crew, each carrying a different kind of crude weapon: iron pipes, monkey wrenches, even brass knuckles glinting under the flickering streetlight. It was a menacing sight, but to Kwon Dagen it felt more like a lifeline. The mystery unraveled quickly. It was Ginmo who had made it all possible, despite his timid appearance. Despite being seen as nothing more than a follower, Ginmo had taken the risk. Using subtle signals, he had informed Kim Min-soo of the ambush, who in turn contacted Minho. It was a desperate gamble, but Ginmo knew there was no turning back. He had reached the end of the road. He no longer belonged anywhere, not with Kim Won-wung, not with the weak, not with the strong. So he made his choice, and he chose to stop being a coward. His betrayal enraged the Banggoon gang. Shouts of anger erupted as they realized that someone from their own side had turned against them. The betrayal was personal, but Ginmo stood firm. For the first time, he wasn't hiding behind anyone. He didn't care what would happen to him. He had made up his mind. Minho, smiling with a spark of recklessness, ordered Kwon Daegan to take on the two gang leaders however he liked. Meanwhile, Minho and his crew would handle the small fry. Kwon Daegan gave a small nod of appreciation. The street lit up with violence once more. Minho went in first. True to his styler, dirty fighter who didn't believe in rules or honor, he threw dust into his opponent's eyes, kicked between their legs, bit, scratched, elbowed, whatever it took. He didn't care about appearances. He fought to win. His crew followed his example, releasing their pent-up rage in waves of destruction. Every pipe swing, every punch, every stomp was an expression of chaos. On the other side of the battlefield, Kwon Daegan turned his attention to his opponents, Lee Jung-man and Chae Jin-woo, the two leaders who had been waiting for this moment. Lee Jung-man, confident in his grappling expertise, believed the fight was already his. He charged forward using a wrestling takedown technique, aiming to drag Kwon Daegan to the ground and end the fight before it began. But his confidence was misplaced. Kwon Daegan countered the takedown with ease, halting the momentum with brutal precision just as he braced himself for a follow-up. Chae Jin-woo struck from behind, delivering a sharp kick. The moment Kwon shifted focus to him, Lee Jung-man wrapped himself around Kwon from behind, locking in a crushing hold. His arms tightened like iron chains, squeezing with full force. He grinned, thinking it was over. His grip was solid. His positioning was perfect. He believed no one could break free from it. But Kwon Daegan wasn't like anyone he had fought before, despite the pressure. Kwon remained calm, his expression unchanged, his eyes steady, as if the crushing hold was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. The panic hadn't come yet, but it would, because Kwon Daegan was only getting started. The air was thick with tension, the sounds of distant shouts and footsteps from the nearby streets, drowned by the brutal chaos unfolding in the alley. Kwon Daegan stood tall, his breathing steady, eyes sharp, even as Lee Jung-man, the massive grappler from Bongin Technical School, had already locked his arms tightly around Kwon's waist from behind. It was the perfect setup for a back suplex. Lee Jung-man was confident. His weight, strength, and grappling mastery had overwhelmed countless opponents in the past. To him, once an enemy was caught in this position, it was over. He pulled with full force, aiming to slam Kwon Daegan onto the hard concrete. But Kwon wasn't just another opponent. As he felt his center of gravity shifting, Kwon scanned the environment. In a split-second decision, he extended his leg backward and pressed hard against the nearby wall. Using that pressure, he halted the suplex midair and flipped the balance in his favor. Instead of being slammed, Kwon twisted his hips and arms, lifting Lee Jung-man off his own feet and hurling the larger boy over his shoulder. Lee Jung-man crashed to the ground with a loud thud. The floor shook. Dust rose before Kwon could follow up. With a finishing blow, a foot flew toward his side fast and clean. It was Chae Jin-woo. His timing was perfect. As Kwon turned, another kick met his ribs, then a third to the thigh. Chae Jin-woo moved like a trained martial artist. Every motion was crisp and calculated. Kwon Daegan recognized it instantly. Taekwondo, kind that wasn't learned for self-defense, but for real combat. For the next minute, the alley turned into a battlefield of rhythm and violence. Kwon blocked what he could, ducked what he couldn't, and absorbed several solid hits. The pressure kept coming. Lee Jung-man, recovering from the reversal, rejoined the assault. He lunged forward, wrapping Kwon from behind once more, trying to trap him with raw power, while Jin-woo darted in and out, launching attacks from the front. Their coordination wasn't perfect, but it was good enough to pose a threat. It was the first time in this fight Kwon Daegan felt slightly pushed back, but it didn't last. Kwon wasn't just reacting, he was calculating, watching, learning. The weakness became clear. Chae Jin-woo's attacks were effective, but repetitive. His combos always ended the same, and he relied too heavily on Lee Jung-man creating openings. Kwon Daegan shifted his focus. He moved forward, breaking Lee Jung-man's grip with sheer force and turning toward Jin-woo with terrifying speed. He closed the distance and delivered a brutal blow fist to ribs. Jin-woo stumbled, the wind knocked out of him. Then came the second hit-tan, uppercut, so strong it lifted Jin-woo off his feet before sending him crashing to the ground. Jinwoo lay motionless for a moment, dazed. His eyes fluttered, as consciousness threatened to abandon him. Jungman quickly knelt beside him, supporting his teammate before his body went completely limp. Kwon stood tall again, his chest rising and falling with quiet intensity. The next moment, Jinwoo stirred and tried to stand, but Kwon didn't hesitate. He stepped in and threw a final punch clean, direct, brutal. It struck Jinwoo across the face, and this time, the boy didn't move again. His body dropped completely, eyes shut. Silence fell. Now, only one obstacle remained. Jungman, who had once been so confident, so sure of victory, was left alone. And Kwon didn't look tired. He looked ready. The alley was quiet now, but tension still hung in the air. Dust floated gently, the aftermath of chaos settling slowly. Only one person remained, standing across from Kwon Jungman. His breathing was shallow, his arms trembling. He looked at the fallen bodies of his teammates Jinwoo, unconscious, and the rest of the Bongan gang, scattered in defeat. Fear began to rise in his chest, clashing with the last fragments of pride that still held him upright. He knew he couldn't win. Deep down Jungman understood that, but still, he wasn't ready to give up without doing anything. Gathering the last of his strength and resolve, he lowered his body and lunged forward, launching another tackle, the same move he had always relied on. But Kwon had seen this before. Too many times, he didn't flinch. With brutal precision, he timed his punch perfectly, smashing it into Jungman's temple as he rushed forward. The hit stopped Jungman in his tracks, his knees buckled, and his body collapsed to the ground. Kwon didn't let it end there. He climbed onto Jungman's chest, pinning him down, and began to throw punch after punch. Brutal, cold, repetitive. His fists pounded into Jungman's face and ribs, one after another. Blood splattered across the pavement. The boy underneath gasped and writhed, overwhelmed and helpless between the punches. Jungman cried out that he surrendered, but Kwon didn't care. His expression didn't change. His fists didn't slow down. Finally, he wrapped his arm around Jungman's neck in an American grip tight, choking, full of intent. He leaned in closer and, with his voice sharp and deadly, made it clear that anyone who dared interfere, anyone who chose to step into his path, would meet the same fate. And then, as Jungman's consciousness faded, his body went limp. The fight was over. At the same time, behind them, the brawl involving Minho and his gang was also coming to an end. Their enemies lay scattered across the alley, groaning or unconscious. Minho stood tall, his knuckles bloodied but his smirk still on his face. Minsu adjusted his broken glasses beside him. Kwon turned back, toward them, and gave a quiet nod. He was grateful. For once he had people who stood beside him. He thanked Minho and Minsu sincerely for helping him and for stepping in when he needed them most. Then, he turned to Gianna and Ara, both of whom had been caught in the middle of something they had never wanted any part in. He apologized, genuinely. But Gianna didn't accept the apology. She was furious. She lashed out at everyone, scolding them for their behavior. Her voice shook with emotion as she berated them, telling them they were all like children, solving everything with fists, choosing violence over responsibility. The way she spoke silenced everyone. It cut through the thick air more sharply than any punch, and without waiting for a response, Gianna turned and walked away, her steps heavy with frustration and pain. But behind her anger, she carried a weight of her own, a burden that none of them fully understood. She had a younger sibling who lay sick in the hospital, and she was the only one left to support that child. The medical bills were endless, and, as cruel as fate could be, that child was a victim of Ilgin too. She had seen too much, been through too much. Elsewhere, away from the bloody alley, in a dim side street, Ginmo and Jinwoo, both bruised and worn, approached Kim Won-woong. But this wasn't a reunion. This wasn't respect. Jinmo's face twisted with anger, his fists clenched. The pain, the humiliation, the betrayal he had endured for following Won-woong's orders burned in his chest like fire. And now, he was ready to unleash it. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows on the concrete walls behind the school. The air was unusually still when Jinmo and his three companions approached Kim Won-woong. The air between them was heavy, something unspoken hanging in the tension. Won-woong tilted his head slightly, confused by their sudden presence. His face remained calm, but his eyes scanned them cautiously. He couldn't understand why they were all standing together, stiff, silent, and serious. Then Jinmo reached into his pocket. His fingers curled slowly into a fist as he brought his hand out, knuckles tightening with purpose. At that moment, Won-woong understood. It wasn't a conversation, it was retribution before he could react. The four of them charged him together. The first blow landed clean, then another, then a kick. Won-woong gritted his teeth and fought back, landing a few hits of his own. His fists still had strength. His rage hadn't cooled, but it was 4 against 1. The beating became overwhelming. There was no space to breathe, no room to escape. Won-woong stumbled back, attempting to flee, but they chased him relentlessly, blow after blow, punch after kick. His pride shattered under the weight of their fury. One of them recorded everything. Somewhere else, in the quiet halls of a hospital, Gianna sat beside a bed. Her younger sibling lay motionless beneath the white sheets, a small hand wrapped in bandages. Machines beeped softly around them. Her expression was solemn, but her eyes burned with something darker. Vengeance. Her voice was quiet, but it carried weight. Whoever had done this, whoever had laid a hand on her sibling would pay the price. It didn't matter who. The pain they caused would be returned tenfold. The next day at school, a new dynamic began to form. With Won-woong having fallen from power, a shift had taken place. The leadership of Class 1 to 6 had changed. Now Jinmo, along with his 3 friends, held control. The weight of power sat on Jinmo's shoulders for the first time, and it showed in his posture, his tone, the way he carried himself. He looked more confident, but that confidence crumbled the moment Kwon Daegan stepped into the classroom. Everything stopped. Every student turned toward the door as Kwon entered calmly, like a quiet storm building strength. His eyes locked onto Jinmo, unblinking. He walked straight toward him and asked a simple question. Did Jinmo want to get beaten again, or would he prefer to fight as equals? Jinmo didn't answer. He didn't try to escape. He simply stood still and lowered his head slightly, accepting whatever was to come. Kwon's fist moved like lightning. The blow landed squarely. Jinmo's body lifted from the ground, almost weightless, and crashed back down like a rag doll. He didn't get up. Silence followed. Then Kwon Daegan turned to the rest of the class. His voice was calm, but it carried command. He declared that there would be no more gangs, no more groups, no more power games. From now on, they were to live peacefully. No more fighting for control. No more dominance. Then he left. By now, Kwon had established dominance over 5 classes, excluding Class 1 to 5. His presence cast a long shadow, and even those who once mocked him now kept their heads low. Later that day, Minho Minsu and another one of their friends celebrated Kwon's rise. They laughed, praising him loudly, proud of what he had achieved. But in typical Kwon fashion, he didn't smile back. He simply slapped all 3 of them calmly and firmly, scolding them for disturbing his focus while he was trying to study. Meanwhile, in another classroom, Suzy Beek sat with Ji-seok. They had been trying to contact Won-woong, but he hadn't shown up at school. Not today. Not yesterday. Suzy, still frustrated, crossed her arms. A part of her felt something deeper toward Kwon, but her pride, her anger, and her confusion blurred the line. She turned to Ji-seok with a sharp suggestion. It was time to reach out to other classes. If they were going to stand a chance at defeating Kwon Daegan, they couldn't do it alone.